Hi guys, welcome to the Business and Remote Work podcast brought to you by Wishup. Guys, today is a really exciting episode. Since COVID, the world has gone remote and back. Companies are now switching back to work from office and there's a new hybrid mode in town. Some suggest work from home is more productive while others believe otherwise. So in this episode, we will discuss unlocking productivity and accountability in a global business world while working remotely. So I'm your host, and today I'm joined by co-founder of Wishup, Nilesh Rangwani, and Liam Martin, who's a co-founder of Time Doctor. So welcome to the show, Liam. It's great to have you here with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be able to jump into this.
Thank you, Liam. And thanks, Nilesh, for joining us as well. So we all already know who Nilesh is. So Liam, why don't you go ahead and start by telling us a bit about yourself and your organization, Time Doctor.
Sure. So my name is Liam Martin. I'm currently in my closet, which is located in Montreal, Canada. And I'm co-founder of a company, as you said, called Time Doctor, which is a time tracking tool specifically built for remote workers. We have team members in 44 different countries all over the world. And we believe that you can build businesses anywhere, regardless of whether or not they're in the office, remote, or anywhere in between. And we are very focused on trying to unlock how work happens and how work can be as productive as humanly possible. And one of the things that we've identified is that distributed work is, in my opinion, actually the most efficient way to be able to leverage labor globally and produce the best return on investment for companies.
Perfect. So Crispino, you mentioned that people know me and you asked Liam to introduce himself, but I would like to tell you that most people in the remote work industry would already know what Time Doctor is, because I think Time Doctor has established itself in the leadership position in the in that tool category. So yes, I think everyone knows Time Doctor, and welcome Liam to the podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, and the other thing too is we run a couple other projects as well. We have a conference called Running Remote, which is the largest conference on remote work. And about 9 months ago, we wrote this, which is called also Running Remote, which is a book specifically built on me studying all of the companies that were running remotely before the pandemic, that are 7, 8, 9-figure businesses, and what they do that everyone else wasn't doing after the pandemic.
Oh yeah, we actually read about it, Running Remote. You're also organizing a conference in Lisbon, I guess, in 2024. Yes?
Exactly, yes.
Would love to know more about this. What's Running Remote about? Because I got to know about this today. So would love to know about
okay. Well, that's great. So basically, we've been running that conference for about 6 years. And what we really were trying to figure out was, and I remember this very clearly, we were in Boracay in the Philippines, which is the party island in the Philippines. And we brought our entire team together. Every year we have a team retreat in an interesting place on planet Earth. And I sat with someone who now actually runs the Running Remote conference. And I said, how do we get to like 500 people remotely? How do we get to 1,000 people remotely? And so we started Googling things. And there was a whole bunch of information on how to hire a virtual assistant, but there wasn't actually much information on how to build a $1 billion plus company remotely. And this was back in 2017. So we took a ready, fire, aim philosophy. I booked a venue and I had no speakers. I had no attendees. We had nothing. And I said, okay, in 9 months, I'm either going to lose $100,000 from booking this venue, or we'll be able to run a successful event. And we did. And so we've been running it for the past 6 years.
Perfect. Awesome. Crispino, if you don't mind, shall I jump into some controversial stuff already?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Okay. So Liam, you believe in remote work. I believe in remote work because we are running our organizations completely remote, right? But then there are some people who do not believe in it, right? There are some CEOs who do not believe in it. Let's talk about Mr. Elon Musk. He has called everybody back to office, right? What do we tell him? What should founders like you and me go and tell him so that he starts believing in remote work? Or what is it that he doesn't like about remote work. So I've always wondered, like, see, I understand if it's a factory, then you need people on the ground. But if there's something that can be done on a laptop or on a phone or from a desk, why are some of the founders and CEOs still not valuing remote work as much as they should? So what's your thought about it?
Boy, that's probably the entire podcast right there on that one question. So I think that what you're referencing is there was an interview, I believe on Fox or CNN, where Elon Musk said remote work is morally wrong.
Yeah.
And when you delve into the perspectives of morality with regards to business, it's an indefensible statement, right? If I say that anything is morally wrong, well, then that's your opinion, and I really can't convince you of otherwise. So I don't know whether or not I could convince Elon, but if I was sitting down with him and I had 10 minutes, I would probably say, in reality, when you look at digital work, which is not building cars as an example, it's designing cars, it's collaborating on them, it's doing marketing to be able to bring them to market. You have to really look at what's the best way of extracting labor from that labor force. And I believe that is remote work. And then also making sure that those workers are as relaxed and resistant towards stress as humanly possible. And I also believe that remote work is the way to do it. At 9:28, I popped up for this call, but 15 minutes ago, I just walked my daughter to her daycare. Right. And then I came in and I'm doing my first meeting today, which is at 9:30 a.m. my time. And so for me, it allows me the ability to be able to have that personal and work-life balance that very few companies and individuals can have access to. And even if you don't want to have that work-life balance, the beauty of remote work is if you're a workaholic and you want to work 14 hours a day, well, you're actually going to earn 2.5 hours back just from your commute, which you can spend on sleeping or doing whatever the heck else you want to be able to do. So the data is pretty clear that I've read 27 studies on remote work productivity over the last 2 years, all academically referenced, and 26 of them have stated that it improves employees' productivity and output, and one said it doesn't. That's a pretty definitive data set. And the people that are saying remote work doesn't work are usually talking about it from more of a tactical perspective. So they're saying, this is what we feel in our company that it's not working. But when you look at an individual data point, there's a lot of bias connected to actually having academic rigor and having something that's a peer-reviewed study. I also believe that there is a deeper issue, which is in studying companies that were successfully executing on remote work for the book, Running Remote, I realized that their managerial layer is on average 50% thinner than their on-premise counterparts. So very successful remote companies having much smaller managerial layer than in-office organizations. And the majority of the people that are pushing back to the office are the managers. The employees don't want to actually go back to the office. 76% of employees state that they want more remote work. In a survey that was done by The Economist, I believe, 2.5 months ago. 67% of managers say they want less. So there's a huge breakdown there. And what I'm recognizing is that managers don't really understand how to manage remotely. And this is the big thing that needs to be figured out for us to be able to move to the next level. Because when February of 2020, we had 4% of the US workforce that was working remotely. By March, it was 45% of the US workforce, 45% of the US workforce working remotely. We peaked at 67% of the US workforce working remotely. We now sit at 26 to 34%, depending upon the data set that you look at. But here's the even crazier statistic. That number is going back up. So we're projected to be back at 50% by 2040. So this is not something that's going away, and you actually have to fundamentally understand how to manage remotely, because at the worst case, if you're a digital worker, 1/3 of your workforce will be working remotely, whether you want it to or not.
Perfect. So yeah, that you answered a lot of my next questions already, Liam. So yeah.
No worries.
So for example, when we go out, when we went out in the market for hiring in 2017 and 18, we found it a little difficult to get people to work from home because people would think that we are a scam, or this is not a company or something like that. Now,
I thought the
COVID,
same.
yeah, it was an unfortunate event, COVID, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise for a few companies because it unlocked the new potential of remote working and increasing the efficiency of the workers, of the teams, right? Now, at one point of time, we did realize that after the end of COVID, we would see people going back to offices, but we did not know what would happen after that. So you mentioned that it went to 26% and now it's going back up, and you believe it's going to be roughly 50%. So I wanted to know, how do you see it evolving? In how much time do you see this unfolding? Because what we are observing at Wishup is something very interesting. Now, people approach us saying that, hey, I want to join you guys because my current employer doesn't allow me to work remotely, and they want me to come to office. Now, to that mixture, we also add one more category of new employees who are recent graduates. Now, imagine people who graduated in the years of 2020, 21, 22, 23. They have been educated remotely. They have gone to colleges remotely, right? Now, just like there was an internet first generation, now there is a remote first generation, right? And these guys don't want to go to offices because they know they can be as productive, right?
Yeah.
So how do you see this space evolving over next few years? How many years? And which are the kind of people who will probably never go back to offices?
Yeah, so I can give you my educated guess on it, which is just my loosely educated guess on it. And I believe that we actually have a few conflicting forces that are happening. So over the next year, we're probably going to see a continuous pushback to the office. Now, this pushback to the office that you're seeing, which I would say borders on almost conspiratorial, is primarily, in my opinion, due to the ticking time bomb that we have in the commercial real estate industry. So, and I'm just using US data, but I think there's corollaries to the Indian market, to the entire Asian market, to the European market. You look at the US data, there's $22 trillion, in unused corporate real estate right now. So pre-pandemic, 4% vacancy rate in the United States. Right now, 22%. And the number's going back up, not going down. It was 20% about 6 months ago. So there's this problem, which is a market, a real estate market that's, I believe, 4 times bigger than the residential real estate market, is collapsing, is imploding in on itself. And this was the absolute blue chip of blue chip stock. Now, who owns most of that $22 trillion in debt? It's banks. They actually own about 22% of it. And if you look at anything like BlackRock, which is the largest investment company in the world, their portfolio is about 40% corporate real estate. So when you look at where that fits, there is no way that we can escape that situation without a lot of pain occurring in that market. So for me, as an example, there's not a penny of corporate real estate in my portfolio. I got rid of it about a year ago. I thought it was going to pop. Basically now, it hasn't, and it may continue on. I mean, obviously there's a lot of weird stuff happening in the economy right now, global economy. So we don't know what's really going to happen next. But I can tell you that 1.5 trillion of those dollars must be paid this year. Okay. And that was the entire buyout of the Americans for COVID relief. So that was every single dollar, new dollar that was printed, 1.5 trillion by the US government to be able to get people out of COVID, which is what put us into our current inflationary tailspin.
Yes.
So just to allow us to survive the next year in the commercial real estate industry, we would have to print the same amount of money. This money doesn't really exist. It's $22 trillion of debt, but it doesn't actually exist as real money. It exists on a whole bunch of hedge fund managers' spreadsheets to be able to identify, yes, we're producing this amount of value and we're producing this amount of return. But the actual commercial real estate industry is also heavily indebted. It's not like the residential market where people own their homes. Commercial real estate is almost entirely, you'll buy commercial real estate, you'll put 5% down, maybe you put another 5% of that payment into it, and then you actually take that and leverage it to be able to buy other properties. So it's debt on top of debt, and that machine, that deck of cards is starting to collapse. So by this time next year, I believe that remote workers will have a pretty significant scarlet letter on them. They will be the people that everyone else will say is what's causing all of this economic pain in the economy. And it's not really the remote workers, it's just a natural evolution of work moving to this next stage of where we need to go next. So when I think about where remote work is going to be, the next year and a half is going to be very, very painful for remote work and the remote work industry. If you are, and I've been doing it for almost 20 years, so I'm in for the long haul, and that's just a bump in the road for me. After that year and a half to 2 years is over and we've figured out what we need to do with regards to the commercial real estate industry, I think you're probably going to see actually a pretty large resurgence. And right now we're seeing a significant percentage of people that are going to a hybrid model. And I think hybrid is going to continue on. It's probably going to be the program that we use moving forward. It's the largest category of remote work inside of that 26%. But I think we're probably going to see that expand. And we're actually going to see hybrid really entrench itself where someone doesn't actually have an office anymore. They have an office space that they go to where they might have it's basically a co-working environment where you'll have a hot desk that you interact with. And at that point, that's when you can really start to free yourself from an individual place. And the other part that I think is going to be very exciting in the next 3 to 5 years is I think you're going to see location independence start to expand. You see all of the employer of record companies that are popping up right now that allow for workers to be able to be more location transitory. So they can not just work in Mumbai, they can go and work all over India, or they could work outside of India if they want. And that's going to further entrench remote work because the freedom and flexibility of being able to work wherever you want, whenever you want, is going to be a complete game changer, I think, for everyone else. So when you see those numbers and you see where they go, I would hold tight to, I would conservatively state 50% of the US workforce will be working remotely by 2040.
Liam, what do you think is the role of AI in this? Do you think AI, Web 3.0, what kind of a role will that play in the evolution of remote work?
I think that when you look at where AI is right now, it was obviously a huge shock when everyone dropped ChatGPT. But if you've been able to play with Google Bard is as good, if not better, than ChatGPT. It's only released in the United States, and they were holding this back because, I don't know if you guys remember, they've taken it off of their website, but their mission was to do no harm, Google. And Bard is definitely a weapon to do harm, right? It's going to create some shocks throughout the economy. But when you look at, I was just talking to American Express yesterday, and they had this entire system that I had to go through, this automated system. And as quickly as I possibly could, I started screaming agent on the phone and hitting the 9 button and the pound button to be able to get me to a real human being that could solve my problem. I think that there's probably quite a few years before we see that roll out. My perspective would be within the next 5 years, there will probably be a significant impact on the customer success, customer support industry. I think that you will probably not see people get completely replaced, but aspects of their job will get replaced. There's a presentation that I gave a few weeks ago where I referenced that AI will not replace you. Someone using AI will replace you. So this is just simply we're moving from the typewriter to the personal computer. You still need the same person to input the information. And my perspective is, worst case scenario in the next 5 years, worst case in the next 5 years, you could probably see 10% of jobs go away due to AI. But I would probably say we'd see less than that.
You know, I have a personal take on that. So every time human civilization comes up with advanced technology, it probably takes away 10% of the jobs, but it creates like 20% more jobs or 30% more jobs. Like that happened with, from typewriters to computers, from, let's say, Adobe to Canva. I mean, the jobs have been created, more jobs have been created than those which have been destroyed. The only thing is that the quality of the job goes up. So let's say if in the past people used to write, let's say, the machine language, now they write JavaScript, right? So it's just that we are just becoming more advanced, and we are meant to do that. As a civilization, we have many more frontiers to capture,
That's a great point. So there's a Freakonomics chapter, which I always reference, which is every single piece of technology that's ever been built to make our lives easier has ended up not necessarily making our lives easier. Like, I remember when personal computing was supposed to change everyone's lives and people would only be working 3 or 4 hours per day. No, we worked more than that. We just produced 10 times the output, right? So we're not going to actually, the amount of time that we're working is not going to change. It's the output that's going to leverage. And that's obviously good for society and for civilization. More work being done faster is better for everyone. But is it going to, are we all going to go to this utopian society where we all just become artists and poets? Hell no, that's never going to happen. Could guarantee it. We live in a capitalist society, and as long as someone has more than someone else, the person below them will work their butts off to try to get that other stuff from that other person.
Yeah, absolutely. So somebody asked me the other day, hey, listen, if AI was able to do everything that we can do today, would everybody be jobless? So my answer to that person was, no, we won't be jobless. We'll probably find a new frontier. For example, we'll probably try and go mining on asteroids and mining gold, and whoever can do that first, probably Tesla or SpaceX will do it first and they'll become rich. Or, there would be some companies who would try to capture the energy of the other stars or the other solar systems. So human beings will always keep finding the next frontier to conquer. And I think we will never be jobless. We will always keep creating new jobs for our society and keep moving forward. So AI is just a enabler in the faster development of our civilization. That brings me to a point that you recently mentioned, Liam, in the conversation, that the location freedom, where people can work from anywhere, let's say, it's profound, right? In today's world where you see that, and I figured out that you read a lot of geopolitics and currency and everything. In today's world where most of the countries are becoming very inward looking and more nationalistic, and they're calling it a de-globalization, right? Do you think the location freedom that comes to remote workers can kind of buck this trend, and people will still mingle with each other because of the remote work and because of the location independence that remote work offers them? What's your view on that?
Yeah, okay, I can get quite nerdy on this one because I think about this one a lot. And when you think about someone who has an Indian passport, as an example, it is significantly more difficult to be location independent than a Canadian passport.
Yes.
We have every single year, as I said, we have a company retreat where we bring everyone into one particular place. And there are passports that are almost impossible for us to be able to get people into almost any country. And so location independence is definitely biased towards a first world or industrial world and developing world countries. There are countries, there's a division there. And so when I think about the next tier of this, the next generation of this, the only way that I see this possibly succeeding is digital nomad visas. So that's basically the best model that I can possibly think of right now. These digital nomad visas that allow you to be able to become relatively location independent and mobile, but there are specific requirements. I'm currently helping the government of Portugal on this and retrofitting their nomad visa. And there's a couple factors that you really have to take into consideration. Number one, the company or the country that you go to will not require any income tax from you for working there. So that's a major part of some of these nomad visas don't actually entrench that. The second part is corporate tax. So if you're an executive, if you own more than 10% of a US corporation as an example, and you go to Spain, I'll pick on Spain a little bit, you cannot go there and you cannot do any work decisions because the corporation should therefore be paying corporate tax in that particular country because you're an executive making executive level decisions in that country. So that also needs to be barred from these particular visas. And then I think the third thing, which is fantastic, is a lot of these visas are saying it doesn't matter where you come from, you must prove income that is generated in a location from wherever you're generating your income from, global income, and then you're simply let into the country. So it doesn't matter whether you have an Indian passport or a Nigerian passport or a Canadian passport or a Colombian passport. It matters, are you making a reliable amount of money? And are you someone that won't necessarily be a problem for that country in the future? Because when you think about someone coming to the country for 6 months, they get an Airbnb, they consume no government services whatsoever, they inject money into the economy, and then they leave. This is the best possible, vacationer that you can get your hands on. And this is something that I only see is going to expand. I think there are a lot of countries that are figuring this out now and saying to themselves, wow, this is a way for us to be able to take advantage of. I actually believe that when you look long term, and we're talking 5 to 10 years into the future, the location independent worker may actually outweigh the entire vacation industry. Because when you think about a 6-month, location independent worker working in Barcelona in Spain versus someone that went for a week to Spain, the amount of income is just like insurmountable, right? Like there's so many dollars invested in the vacation industry right now and attracting people to their respective countries. And if you took 10% of that capital, you implemented a nomadic visa, and I actually think we need to change the name. I don't like the term digital nomad visa because there's lots of negative connotations towards digital nomads. I would call it like location independent worker as an example. And that would be a really good visa to be able to set up just the way that I described, so that you can sit down and you can say, hey, this is the way that we want to be able to build our businesses and attract a massive amount of extra capital to our respective countries.
Oh yeah, I got a name for you. Remote worker visa.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. Remote worker visa. Let's deploy those. They're all digital nomad visas. It's basically the same thing. As long as they don't have income tax and corporate tax requirements, they are great. Go and check them out.
But you just opened up a Pandora's box. I mean, if countries start thinking in that direction, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is buy Airbnb stock, because all these remote workers are, just gonna, stay in all these Airbnbs. Oh yeah, that makes so much sense. Perfect.
Nilesh is good.
Wanted to say something,
Yeah, I'm just thinking, Nilesh is going to start investing this right after this call.
Yeah, because I didn't realize this was so great. I mean, if Portugal can do it, I'm pretty sure some more countries are going to come up with these visas.
There are 49 countries already.
At this, yeah, the last count that I got was 66.
Wow.
That I think we had 2 months ago. That was the latest count. So they're all implementing them. I'm actually building a large piece of content specifically on trying to identify which ones are actually good versus them just kind of throwing up a sticker and saying, hey, we're a digital nomad visa. Like Bali, as an example, requires $100,000 in escrow to be able to get the digital nomad visa. Difficult to be able to actually get people to come, but you should reduce that to 10,000 and then you'll get a much larger influx of people. And if you run into trouble, you take that 10 grand, they fix you up in the hospital and they send you on your way.
But that's awesome. I mean, the government doesn't have to pay social security benefits and they still get to boost their economy. Like, I never thought of this way. I mean, that's brilliant.
Right.
I mean, most of the government would love this. Yeah. So would love to know more about these companies that you mentioned, running remote, and you have been working with 3 companies in the past. Would love to know more about this.
Sure. So I think I actually specifically want to kind of address some of the stuff that we had in the book, because one of the things that happened during the pandemic is, I really call it emergency remote work. So people didn't, it was one day I was working in the office, the next day there's this scary virus outside and I have to work away from the office for months. You know, we worked for almost a year. I remember India, and it got really tough. And I remember some of our Indian team members were quite scared during the second wave of COVID. And so everyone was in this hyper stressful environment. And we didn't really have time to take a breath and recognize, how should we actually manage remote workers? No one asked the question, do remote workers need to be managed differently from in-office ones? And I believe they do. And from the hundreds of companies that I've known before the pandemic that were working remotely, they do operate differently. And I believe they operate in a way that's actually very alien to on-premise in-office companies. And I call it in the book asynchronous management. So it's the ability to be able to manage people without directly interacting with them. I believe for the scheduling of this call, we interacted with a couple team members, Vaishali, who actually is in India, Aretha, who's in the Philippines, and I believe Lauren, who is in the United States.
Yes.
And I maybe meet with them once a quarter.
Yeah.
On Zoom. So the vast majority of our communication happens asynchronously, happens through project management systems, email, instant messaging. And that's the way that most of these companies have operated for decades. We have in the book companies like GitLab that have 10,000 plus employees, and there's a multi-billion-dollar company. They work entirely that way. WordPress, which runs 30+% of the internet, they've been a completely asynchronous organization for decades. And these companies run seamlessly without actually anyone meeting face-to-face for a Zoom call or an in-person call, or that time is minimized pretty significantly to optimize what my friend Cal Newport calls deep work, which is the ability to be able to operate in a state of extreme focus and execute on a particular project or idea inside of the business. So asynchronous management provides you the framework to empower every single team member inside of your company to delve into deeper and deeper work and focus inside of your business.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because a big part of working remotely also is about the kind of team members that you are working with. At Wishup, we have realized that people who are inherently more organized and they believe in the processes and the documentation are more suitable for remote work than people who, who are a little disorganized in their lives. That we also found that in our clients. For example, there are people who come with a very operational mindset. They need everything on the to-do list and maintain asanas and everything. They turn out to be our good clients. They turn out to
Right.
be successful clients for us, right? So what I want to ask you is, what are your parameters, or how do you look at team building in a remote setup so that it's built for success, right? So at Wishup, we have like 50 plus parameters on which we evaluate people, but would love to, pick your brains on it. How do you figure out what kind of people are suitable for remote work and would succeed in remote work?
So we've done a little bit of psychometric testing, and there's a really great book by Erin Meyer. I can't remember the name of it right now off the top of my head, but I'm going to actually Google it right now for everybody. It is Culture Map. So Erin Meyer wrote this great book called Culture Map, which allows you to be able to identify how different cultures interact with each other as it applies to work. And it's a really interesting book to be able to get deeper insights from those types of things. But what we've identified is there are fundamentally a few psychometric triggers that will define success for remote work. And then there's some larger scale ones. The biggest one is introversion. So if you are introverted, you actually become a lot more successful in terms of remote work. And our definition of success is you don't quit your job. You're successful in that position, you work well. There is a product manager that works about 3 blocks from me, and I meet him once every 6 months.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even show up to my house, even though I try to bother him all the time. But he actually told me once that I was quite annoying and distracting towards his focus. So he said, "Hey, you know what? Let's try to meet as little as humanly possible," which hurt my feelings, but I totally understood. So,
but that makes so much sense.
Yes. So introversion, and then also defending your time. So we also have this other aspect, which is a company value. We call it self-guided missile. So someone that is able to not just identify what the target is, but how to get there. So usually management defines the target, but then it's the employee's job to be able to get to that particular target. Because when you have employees in 44 different countries all over the world, it's very, very difficult to be able to actually guide people towards the target. We need self-starters that are really interested in doing it on their own. And we've found that, for us at least, when you look at the general population, probably about 20-ish% of the population are self-guided missiles, and the other 80% really want it all laid out for you. And I really think it's kind of just boils down to 2 different categories. Either you have an organization where everything is process-based, so you have that type of person, that every single thing needs to be built into a process, and that's 80% of the population. So you can't have an organization that doesn't have a component of those types of people inside of your company. You need to build processes. They're at the core of everything that a successful remote company does. But then there's 20% of the population that doesn't need that, that says, "Hey, I'm good. I actually want to be the person that builds the process. I want to be able to go out and figure out these new aspects of how to generate more revenue inside of the business or innovate in some particular direction. So I don't need to be shown how to get there. I'll get there on my own." Those are the 2 psychometric variables. And then the 3 core tenets for the Running Remote book is deliberate over communication, democratized workflows, and detailed metrics. So deliberate over communication, you want to be able to make sure that processes are not just easy to understand, but impossible to misunderstand. So what do I mean by that? It means you need to actually, if you're going to build a process, which is absolutely critical, we believe that the platform should be the manager inside of an organization, not necessarily the managers themselves. And so taking that information, making it as clear as humanly possible so that it's impossible to misunderstand is critical. And it's a small little mindset change, but once you actually switch over to that, you're going to see a lot more success. Democratized workflows, everyone in the organization needs to be able to make sure that those processes are shared amongst the entire organization and that they're used effectively. The number one reason why someone fails at asynchronous management is not because building the processes are hard. A lot of them build it It's just they're not used throughout the organization. And then they basically go back to their managers to be able to ask questions instead of actually having the repository of processes be the place where they ask those questions. And then the third one, which is detailed metrics. So we believe in a perspective of radical transparency throughout the organization. We use Time Doctor. Every single employee inside of the company uses Time Doctor, including myself. And they know right now that I am on a podcast with Wishup as an example. And then all of that ROI that we would generate from this particular interaction feeds back into it so that we can quantify every single activity that we do inside of the business and identify, is this an ROI positive activity or is it not? And that is something that also most successful remote companies use as well.
Perfect. Sorry, I have hijacked Crispino's podcast.
That's
so
okay.
I would want to ask the next question. Just one last question. Since you elaborately mentioned these specific traits of the companies who are successful remote companies, and since you have a bird's eye view, can you name one company which you think has nailed it completely? This process.
I would probably say GitLab is just it continuously.
I was going to say the same.
I would say they have nailed their processes. Their processes are completely open source. If you just type in GitLab process documents, you will have, I believe they're up to 6,500 different entries now in their repository. So you can get access to it and you can start right there. Their culture is really good. They very clearly have defined who they are and why they work remotely. So yeah, they're doing a great job. I think another really couple honorable mentions would be companies like WordPress, which are really kind of the OGs of remote work when you think about companies that are doing it well. Another great company is Basecamp. They wrote a fantastic book, which is the most popular book written on remote work, called Remote. And it's really good for people that are just starting out to be able to get access to that book. But there are, we went back and talked about this next generation of remote companies and where they're coming from. 16% of people at Y Combinator, which is the largest kind of tech accelerator incubator in the world, were starting their businesses remotely pre-pandemic. Just this last cohort, 65% of those companies are being started remotely. So we're seeing this new generation, as you had pointed out, that are saying, I'm going to operate remotely from day one. And they are much more effective at implementing asynchronous management and remote work at scale. And they're going to be the companies in the next 5 to 10 years that completely blow everyone out of the water because they're just operating on a more efficient model than their on-premise counterparts.
Yeah, and that reminds me, one of their parameters when they used to select startups, which was they wanted both the founders to be on the same screen. I guess they would have to change it now.
Right. Well, and so I think that when you look at how a little bit of a secondary story, me and my business partner, Rob, we got interviewed for Y Combinator for Time Doctor. And at that point, I think the company had been operating for about a year. This was back in like 2012, 2013. And we were generating revenue. And they were really excited to be able to see us. And the thing that is quite weird about Y Combinator is they flew my business partner, Rob, from Australia, and they flew me from Canada. And when we arrived, there were checks there for us for the flights that we had paid to be able to come in for this interview. And the interview lasts 5 minutes. 5 minutes. It's only a 5-minute interview. So they fly two of us from basically the other corners of the world to San Francisco for a 5-minute interview. We do the interview, and then they sent us an email that day, because they do send it to you very quickly, and they say that our response was, we believe that you'll be $100 million business, but we don't believe you'll be $1 billion business, and we only invest in $1 billion businesses. And they were absolutely right, except they didn't see COVID happening. So that was the only piece, is COVID, we were on that trajectory, and they were absolutely right. And I was very happy to own a $100 million business.
Yeah.
But COVID is what completely accelerated our trajectory and turned us into a $1 billion valuation company. And so that was the piece that I think they didn't necessarily take into consideration. And if we were interviewing today, they would probably think very differently. And I think that those organizations are really good at adapting to that new direction. And when you see 65% of their cohort starting remotely, there's going to be a lot more remote companies in the next 5 to 10 years that are going to be huge.
Yeah, it reminds me of the books called Black Swan and Anti-Fragile. So over to you, Crispino. I'm sorry for hijacking your podcast, but you can ask questions now.
No, that's all right, Nilesh. So Liam, I had one question for you. So, we've already seen the success of remote work, and going back to the question that Nilesh said earlier in the show, why is Elon against it? So what could be some misconceptions or some myths about remote work that people may have, because of which they're still not acknowledging the fact that they need to accept remote work is here to stay?
Yeah, so the biggest one is that remote workers don't do work, that they're just kind of screwing around at home. That's basically the biggest misconception. And if you really want to nail down what everyone doesn't want to talk about, which is the elephant in the room, it is, how do I know what they're doing when they're working from home? And there is a massive generation of the old guard of MBAs that just say, listen, when they're in the office, I know what they're doing. Well, I'll tell you, when they're in the office, you don't know what they're doing, because they're playing Candy Crush, or, they're playing all of these video games or on their phone or something like that, just as much as when they're actually at home. Yeah, absolutely. They're doing it just as much as when they're at home. But the difference is that when they're at home, there's exactly the same amount of distractions. I would argue actually less. And remote workers work on average about an hour and 15 minutes more per day than their on-premise counterparts. But when you actually look at that workday, it's a different type of workday. They might go and have an hour and a half lunch with their wife or husband, as an example, or maybe they end up taking a longer walk, and that's all kind of connected to that workday. So their work-life balance is significantly better when they work from home. But when you look at a direct output perspective, the amount of widgets generated throughout a week, a remote worker versus an on-premise worker, it is, in most studies, the same or better than if you look at just office workers. So remote workers win every single time, and the reality is that the data just isn't super clear. Running Time Doctor, I get to be able to see the data, and it's very clear for us that remote workers are more efficient than on-premise ones. If they were not, I wouldn't be running the business remotely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
So Liam, how's your journey been so far with Time Doctor? Like, you started off in 2012, pre-pandemic, right? And you've seen the pandemic. Yeah. And now you've seen a boom during the pandemic phase, and right now with hybrid models. So how has your journey been so far? And I have a second question to that, which I'll ask later.
Sure. So February of 2020, 4% of the US workforce working remotely. By March, it was 45% of the US workforce. Biggest shift in work since the Industrial Revolution, but the Industrial Revolution took 80 years, and we did that in March. So completely changing everything that we understand about work. And for little old Time Doctor, we went from doing about 5,000 leads a month in February to doing 35,000 leads in March. So a complete change of our business model. And we immediately switched from a kind of need to have, or a want to have, to a need to have instantaneously. And so we had built a bunch of brand recognition there, and then we transitioned over to all of that brand recognition resulting in, now that we need this, so we need to be able to buy it. In the last couple quarters, obviously that desire has kind of waned off, but we're still seeing a significant lift in demand in comparison to where we were pre-pandemic. And as I had said before, we're probably going to see a lull over the next year and a half, but I fully expect that number is going to go way back up once we recognize that, number one, everyone is just adapting to hybrid and really kind of recognizing how to work effectively remotely. So once more people learn how to manage remote workers, we're going to see a huge influx, primarily actually spearheaded by these new companies that are working remotely from day one. And once they are going to be, I think it's going to be not just a tactical advantage, I think it's going to be a strategic advantage where you have exactly the same companies, but because one works remotely, they're 30% more efficient than the other one. And everyone will have to actually switch remote. It won't be a choice of whether you should do it. It will be a choice of we need to do it or we're going to go out of business.
Yes. And you never find the most talented or more skilled worker in the same zip code as yourself. You'll always find them somewhere in the world. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So Liam, is there any challenges that you faced from people who want to maybe adapt the technology? Any sort of resistance?
Absolutely.
Because,
I think I think the biggest resistance comes from management, primarily actually, when we're talking about the context of COVID. So they're just saying, listen, we need to be able to see them. And Time Doctor actually provides a fantastic bridge because it provides accountability while still being able to have the worker work remotely, which is, to me, our mission is we're trying to empower the world's transition towards remote work. And so that provides us with an excellent way of providing that advantage to the worker so that the worker can work remotely, and the accountability to the employer to be able to say, I understand what they're doing throughout their workday. It's clear that they are actually getting work done. And now I can be a lot less stressed because I know what's happening on a day-to-day basis.
But yeah, if it helps in any way, I mean, I want to say it on record and maybe you can create a clip out of it. We at Wishup.co, we use Time Doctor for 300 plus employees. We absolutely love it. My co-founder, like he's discovered this magic tool somewhere in last year, after which he says, all my problems are solved. I mean, life has become so much easier, and it's like he always used to say, hey, listen, whatever amount of money that we are going to save from not having an office, we should have a virtual office, and Time Doctor is that virtual office. So he's that happy. So yeah, Time Doctor has been working fantastic for us, and I would encourage all of our viewers and our clients to just try it out once. Yeah, over
awesome. Yeah, that's a great infomercial. Thank you very much. I will clip that out.
It's been
awesome. Yeah, we've also actually we've been working together on an affiliate deal as well. So yeah, we've already joined forces out there.
Right.
But yeah, that was basically all for today, Liam. That's all that I had. So before we wind up, is there anything, Liam, that you'd like to tell all our entrepreneurs who are thinking of working remotely out there?
Yeah, so remote work is no longer a want, it is a need. You are going to need to be able to understand how to manage remote workers. If you think it's going away, you're crazy. So adapt now, recognize that change. And if you want to check out any of our products, you go to timedoctor.com, you get a 14-day free trial there. If you're more interested in learning more about remote work, go check out the book, Running Remote. You can get it on audiobook, digital, or hard copy. And then if you're even more interested, go to the Running Remote conference that's happening next year in Lisbon, where we break down all of the tactics and strategies to be able to build a $1 billion remote company.
And to add to that, I know you didn't ask me, but I'll add to this. For new founders, people who are new to entrepreneurship or new to remote work, do check us out. We will provide you virtual assistants, remote employees within 24 hours. So you can build your remote teams within 24 hours, top-notch talent from across the world. And you would absolutely love us. So check out Wishup.co.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, Liam. Thanks, Alesh.
Thank you, Liam. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Would love to, exchange ideas with you much more. Your time is very precious, but would love to learn from you and share our learnings and maybe can
For
help.
sure.
Yeah.
Look, we could do this again in 2 years when the space has completely changed. Corporate real estate has completely collapsed and everyone hates remote workers. I think that will be a really fun time to jump on. And then we should reference this podcast to say, Liam was right. The world did collapse and now Liam will tell you how to get out of it.
Perfect.
I hope so. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Liam. Bye-bye.
Yes, Liam. Bye-bye.